Welcome csc230 class to ex4 responsive, and what we're going to do is we're going to use our ex2 folder once again, duplicate it, and just do a little review of responsive web design. And responsive web design basically is going to make it adjust to fit the device that you're viewing it on. Just to give you an example, here's a finished version here, and we're going to start this from scratch, but here's a finished version of my folder, and that's why I have it called ex4 finished, and you won't have it called that. Yours will be called responsive, ex4 responsive. But one thing just to point out here, notice there's an extra file in here called ex4-css. We're going to put our CSS in an external file and link to it. It'll just be easier to keep track of our CSS and our HTML separately. So if I open my index in here, you can see our HTML is a lot simpler. There's a lot less code in here. It doesn't have all our styles and everything. And basically in the head tag, instead of having all our styles in styles tags, like we did for internal style sheets, is we're going to keep them in a file called ex4.css, and we're going to link to it so that this page knows to use those styles. And here it is. It's just a very simple tag here, a link tag with the properties rel, relative, and type, and then also a reference to the actual file. So this is going to link to our CSS file. We also have another meta tag in here that we're going to use for responsive design, and that's about it. And then the rest of our CSS is going to go in a CSS file. And we're also going to do something called media queries so that it looks like this. Let me actually open this up, and I'll open this up in a new window, and I'll close this because I don't like having this here unless I would need it for some reason, but I'll close this up. And here's what it looked like last time, the last thing you should have done, and everybody did a nice job of doing that. Now if I resize this, what I want to have happen is when I resize it, I want to have it actually, instead of getting covered up, which is what normally will happen, what we're going to do now is going to have it resize so that if it fits on a phone or any other kind of device, it'll kind of reformat so that it's no longer two columns, and then it kind of works in a single column kind of view. Now this is a simplistic kind of view of responsive, just going from basic two column with this floated image into one column. But also what's happening too, instead of being fixed size, which was 800 pixels, it's now, notice that our image is scaling. This image up here, our header image is scaling. Our margins are going to be scaling. Everything's going to be scaling. The float's going away. This thing can be left justified or center. I ended up putting it centered so that it kind of reads, if you had to read this in a phone, it'll work better like this. So that's what we're going to try to do with responsive web design. So basically our layout responds to the device it's being viewed on. So we're just going to do a review of that, and there's different ways of doing this. There's even frameworks called Bootstrap, and there's even something called Flex that does this that we can explore a little bit, but we're going to do this kind of manually with media queries. And where to do this is we're going to get some of our resources right from W3 Schools. That's just the easiest, and it's all going to be under CSS. So one of the things we're going to have to do in CSS first is we're going to have to link to our external style sheet and create an external CSS style. So let's do that first. And here's the 3 ways to insert CSS. We've already done it internal. Inline is where you actually put it in the HTML tag like we have to do in our discussion boards, but we're going to use this. This is going to be our link. So we're going to copy and paste this link right out of here, just the link, into our page. But before we do that, I'm going to go here and I'm going to close this up because I'm going to start from scratch and do what you're going to do. So I'm going to close this up. If I need to look at it, I can look at it. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to close up my preview window, and I'm going to close this, because what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to duplicate my ex2 CSS, and this is what you're going to do. You're going to right click and duplicate this, and when you do, you're going to rename it, and I'm basically going to call it ex4-responsive, and you could spell out responsive, or you could use RESP, whatever you want, but I'll just put responsive. And this is what I'm going to be working on right now. Just open it up, make sure everything looks okay in here. And notice it does not have a CSS file. It should have my 2 images in here, which it does. And it only has an index file. So I'm going to go open my index file, and I'll scroll to the top here. I might as well make a new file before I actually cut and copy anything. So let me make a new file. And while I have this folder open, I'm going to go File, New File. Do this menu, do File, Save As, and make sure that it's going in here. It should say ex4 response. So this is the folder it's going into, and I'm just going to call it ex4.css. No dashes, no nothing, just ex4.css. That's all you need. And make sure it's going in your new folder that you just duplicated from your ex2. So there it is. And now by putting that .css, it will recognize that it's a CSS file and it will color code it appropriately. And if you even want to, you could even put a little thing here and just put CSS file. This is CSS comment, and they do not do the double forward slashes. They actually do slash asterisk asterisk slash. That's really hard to say, so I'm going to try not to say that again. But this is a CSS comment, and then we're going to put our CSS after here. Now we don't have to write any new CSS, at least for now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up, go back to my index, and here it is in a tab right here, and I'm going to cut everything from the style tag to style tag. I could leave the style tag there for now, and I'll scroll down and I'll get all my CSS that I used on my last assignment right up to the last curly bracket here, and I'm just gonna, you could even copy it or you could cut it. I'm gonna cut it, and I'll go into my CSS and I'll paste it. And you don't want your style tags in here, so if you have style tags, get rid of them. It should just start with your CSS styles. So there's all my CSS, my wildcard right through my footer at the end here. So I'm going to save this. So I'll do File Save or Control S or Command S. I'll save my CSS file, and we're going to kind of work with two files here for a while. Then I'm going to go to my index because I have to fix that first. We don't really need these style tags, so I'm going to get rid of these, and I'll get rid of, actually I'm going to leave one of my comments here because I'm going to use it, but I'll get rid of my style tags. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this comment, and I'm going to put meta tag for responsive. That's a note to myself, and we're going to put a meta tag right below here. And then for here, I'm just going to put link to external style sheet. And you could put style sheet or styles. And then we're going to put two things inside here, and notice it's all going to go inside the head tag. So where do I get this stuff? Well, two things. I'm going to go to CSS, and we'll do two of these right now. I'm going to go to CSS, and here's the how-to. Here's the external style sheet. I'm going to copy this tag right here, this link tag, and I'm going to put it in here. I'll put it right below this one, and I'm going to change this because it's not going to mystyle.css, it's going to ex4.css, and you don't need a slash or any ex4.css, exactly like it is here. So that's where that's going. So I don't need anything else. It doesn't have to have a folder in front of it because it's in kind of the main directory here. So we're in the root directory of ex4 responsive. So that's all you need to link to that. Now actually, before I do that, let me save this. Once that link is broken and you actually preview this, so I'm going to preview this just to see it without CSS. I'll do live preview file, and I'll open it in a browser, and I'll go here and I'll close this up. And there may be times you may want to do something with this open to just see what happens immediately, but I'm going to go here and you can see what happens. Our CSS is broken, so it's back to the way it started. So let's link up our CSS styling, and again I'll just put ex4, and that has to be linking to that file, and I'll just save this and let's see if it fixes it. Yes, and now it's linked up, everything's okay, and everything looks fine. Well, at least the way it was the first time. But what we're also going to do is we're going to make it responsive so that when it resizes, when we resize it, it won't just cover up our stuff. It'll actually resize our picture, it'll make it one column, it'll adjust our margins and our padding slightly. So we'll do a couple things with responsive. Now to do that, I'm going to go back to my W3 schools. They have an area for responsive. So I'm going to go down to responsive, CSS responsive, and I'm going to go right to, there's an intro here, and please read this so you know a little bit about responsive design. And the second page here is Viewport. And without reading anything about Viewport, all I want you to do is just copy this. This will help the way it scales inside a device. So we're going to copy the Viewport tag. It's a meta tag because it starts off with meta. And I'm just going to put it right here. And that's where our meta viewport. Now, you won't see anything really happen when you put that in. That's not going to change anything. If we go and resize our page, that viewport isn't going to change anything. Our media queries are. But we do need that because that will help us the way it views in a device. And again, since we're online here, you can always just find the link and go on your phone, on an iPhone or Android, and check out and see what it looks like if you need to. And we'll try to do that so we're not just kind of pretending here in a browser. All right, so we have our tags that we need in here, and I'm even going to clean this up a little bit and just kind of get rid of some extra space in here. I like to keep space in between sections, so at least there's kind of one gap here because I have my header separate from my main and separate from my footer. That just helps me organize my HTML page a little bit better. What we're going to do next is start working with our CSS to write media queries. Now what media queries are, if you go here and check out media queries, they're basically alternatives. And I'm going to use this very first one here before I read anything about media queries, and they're called breakpoints. And you'll see a number here called a breakpoint, and the breakpoint is basically when you get to the point and you want it to kind of change. So we might want to do it right at 800 because we know our page is 800, or you might want to go a little less. You might want to say, well, why don't we go to like 700? I have a little add-on or a little extension in here called Page Ruler that I could put on, and I could get to kind of this point, and I could say, well, maybe about that point, and then I could kind of measure it and kind of look at it up in the corner. This is a little extension I use. There's different extensions you could use to kind of measure your page, and I could say, yeah, about 700. If I go to 700, I'll move this over here, and if I resize my page to 700, that's about good. It's starting to cut off the picture here. It's starting to cut off the text. So once it gets smaller than this, instead of people scrolling right and left, I'm going to have it turn into a one-column page. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll use 700 rather than 800. You could use 800, but I'm going to use 700 so that it kind of snaps. It uses what's called a breakpoint, and that's why they call them breakpoints, because once it gets to that breakpoint, your layout's going to change, and it's going to use some alternative CSS styles. Now they have one here called max width, and that basically means up until the max width, do this. So this means anything below. It's a little confusing because they use the term max, but it's basically you're going to design for anything below that max width. So we're going to use 700. So I'm going to copy this. I'll copy this tag right here. This it's actually a separate CSS item that's going to go after all your other CSS. So this will go after your CSS in your CSS file. So I'll just copy it, and I'll go to my CSS file, and let me save my index since I just made some changes there, and I'll go to my CSS, and I'll scroll down to the end, and I'll put this at the end. Now one thing just to point out here, and I'll tab this in so it looks better, so it's all kind of organized here. One thing that I want you to realize is that the media query has tags, and then there's also separate curly quotes for each style that's inside there, for each declaration that's inside of there. So keep in mind at the end you're going to have two curly brackets at the end. It's kind of like if you ever did JavaScript and you have an if-else statement and you have extra curly brackets. So keep in mind that if you ever get an error there, you're going to get some kind of thing there, and it's probably because you don't have the extra curly bracket. So make sure you keep that there. So everything, all the styles that we do here are going to be inside this media query of 600, and we're going to change it to 700. And you could have multiple breakpoints. You could have some that change at 700, some that change at 500, 400, and so on. So there's different ways you could use these, but we're just going to use one for now, and we're not going to change our body to light blue, but we are going to change our body. Now let's take a look at this before we kind of take a break here. We're going to just kind of put some notes here on what we're going to change. And we're going to try to change anything that's absolute pixel width. And I'm just going to put some comments here, and I'm just going to say change, and I could even just put change for now. So I know I'm going to change this, and I could say change from absolute, and I may want to put that to percentage, and I'll even put that there. I'll put some notes here, and then I'll just copy these, and I'll just kind of mark to myself what I want to change. That'll help scrolling around trying to figure it out. Margin auto could probably stay the same. Everything in here could probably stay the same, but that's going to change. My height, this might change. In my main, my padding might change. Now you might say, well, how do you know that? Well, I see something called pix, 20 pix, so I may want to change that. I may want to change the 20 pix to a percentage. So I'll just say change to percentage. Anywhere you see something like that, you may want to change to percentage. I'm not sure what we're going to do with our height yet, but I just want to point that out. And then also a couple things here as I go down. I'm going to point these out, and it'll just be easier for us to find them. This may be one, might be changing to percentage, may not. And then also here, I'm going to paste something here, and I'm just going to say remove float because we're not going to have these side by side anymore. So we're going to make a note for that. And actually when we're done, then we're going to put kind of like a check, like query, just so we know to look down to the query that we actually made that change. So this is just notes to ourselves to change some things. Fig caption looks okay. Fig image looks okay. Our main H1 looks okay. Padding may change here for main. And I think, yeah, we have our main here, our padding. I think that's it for now. Okay, so now that we have everything set up, we're going to start making some changes and start building on our media queries. But let's take a break here because I think the video is getting a little long, so we'll stop here and we'll pick up with actually doing our responsive design in part 2.